Hey guys, tonight we're taking a very unusual stroll through candlelit corridors of medieval castles, where blue blood flowed a little too close to home. You'll follow the soft shuffle of velvet slippers across cold stone floors, smell the beeswax candles burning low, and hear the whispered prayers of women who married their own cousins, uncles, and occasionally, yes, siblings. These aren't the fairy tale princesses of bedtime stories. These were real women with real titles and dangerously limited dating pools. You're about to find yourself in a high tower suite, the tapestries fluttering slightly from the draught no mason ever sealed properly. The girl in the mirror, she's royalty, yes, but that regal nose looks suspiciously like the one on the portrait above the fireplace. And that's her great-grandmother. You probably won't survive this court's matchmaking customs unless you're ready to recite your family tree before breakfast. Twice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Invite viewers to post their location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The castle is unusually quiet tonight, save for the soft creak of your shoes on polished floors. You're a young handmaid, assigned to tend to the noblewoman of the hour, a cousin wife by blood, a duchess by marriage, and someone you've been warned not to look at too directly. They say the eyes of royal women like her can see right through common folk, but really it's just a habit she picked up, studying people, checking for traces of the same nose, same jaw, same pale complexion that dances through every branch of her family. The room smells like rosewater and cold stone. The candles flicker nervously as you help her out of her stiff bodice, layer by layer. You catch a glimpse of the birthmark behind her shoulder blade, one her sister shares in the exact same place. You say nothing. This is Duchess Margaret. Her chin juts slightly, and her mouth turns downward when she's not smiling. You've heard some of the other maids whisper behind her back, "The Habsburg jaw," they giggle, but never when she's within earshot. It's not polite, and besides, everyone knows her blood is the purest in court. So pure, it loops back in on itself. She sits before the mirror, and you brush her hair, long, pale, and strangely dry no matter how much oil you use. The silence stretches. She's always quiet after supper. It's as though the food weighs her down, not just in her stomach, but in her soul. You've heard her cough at night, not a loud racking one, but a persistent papery wheeze, like a parchment rubbing against itself. Tonight she asks you something unexpected. "Do you think I look like my father's sister?" You freeze. This isn't a safe question. Your mind races. You've seen paintings. You've poured wine for both women. Yes, they share features. Too many. You go with a neutral answer. "M'lady, you carry the elegance of your whole line." She hums. That's a good sign. Outside, bells toll for vespers, but they're muffled by the thick walls. Inbreeding, you've heard from the old cooks, is a noble tradition. Keep the power close. Keep the gold closer. But there are costs. Hidden costs. Behind the painted smiles and thick velvet gowns, some of the women never learned to walk properly. Others never bore children. A few went mad by 30, but they were all, every one of them, born of royal union. One woman, Princess Agnes, who lived in the North Wing before it was boarded up, he was said to be so sheltered, so carefully preserved by generations of inbreeding, that her skin tore easily in the sun. They called her the Glass Dove. She never left the castle. Some say her ghost still wanders the gardens when the moon is high, clutching a lace parasol. Margaret knows all this. She doesn't speak of it, but her eyes are heavy with it. The weight of legacy, of genetic repetition, of family portraits that all look the same generation after generation. You tidy her bed linens, embroidered crests on every corner, lions, eagles, and bloodlines wrapped in scrolls. She doesn't say goodnight. She never does. Just nods, like she's saving her breath. As you close the door softly behind you, the hall yawns open. Echoes bounce from tapestry to stone. You think about her question again, not just about resemblance, but recognition. Did she ask you to see her, or to see through her? Scholars remain divided on just how much medieval nobility understood about heredity, but they certainly tracked lineage like hawks. It wasn't science, it was politics, superstition, and divine right all mashed together. Marrying your cousin wasn't just acceptable, it was often expected. Royal houses like the Habsburgs considered it a way to preserve the purity of their rule. But nature doesn't always cooperate with strategy. In time, you'll come to realise Marguerite is just one bead on a thread stretching centuries, and the thread doesn't fray, it coils. You descend the stairs slowly, running your hand along the smooth stone wall. Another room waits. Another noblewoman with another version of the same face. But for tonight, it begins here, with a single question, whispered between brushstrokes and candlelight. Do I look like my aunt? You never answered, not really. And in the quiet, she probably heard everything anyway. You rise early, far earlier than any sane person should in a drafty stone palace like this. The sun hasn't bothered to peek through the arrow-slit windows yet, but already the castle is stirring. Kitchens hiss, chapel bells mumble through thick air, and your feet ache before your apron's even tied. You've been assigned to assist with the Habsburg court's morning rituals today, specifically the young Archduchess Maria. Not that Maria, or that one. No, this is Maria who lives in the East Wing, the one with the pale grey eyes and the awkward, overly symmetrical face. Her cousins all have the same nose. She just has more of it. You shuffle toward her chamber and gently knock. No answer. You enter anyway. She's standing perfectly still at the window, hands clasped behind her back, staring at the garden below. She does this every morning, as if waiting for something to bloom that never will. She turns. Her chin catches the light in a way that reminds you, uncomfortably, of Duke Ferdinand, her uncle and father-in-law. She's to marry her second cousin next spring, or maybe it was her first cousin once removed. Honestly, the family chart looks like a pasta bowl at this point. She nods to you, silent as usual. You help her into her gown, a stiff brocade number that weighs more than a sack of potatoes. She's no more than 17, but already bears the posture of someone much older, weighed down not just by fabric, but by the expectation to replicate her own bloodline. Her maid before you once whispered about Maria's mother, how she refused to eat for weeks before her wedding, dreading the idea of marrying a man who looked like her brother because, well, he was. Sort of. There's a knock. A young courtier enters with a tray. Breakfast, poached eggs, soft bread, something pretending to be jam. Maria picks at it with a spoon like it might be poisoned. Not by enemies, mind you, by inheritance. You sit quietly. Court etiquette demands your presence but not your speech. That's fine. It gives you time to watch. Maria isn't sick, not exactly. But there's something faded about her. Her eyes drift, unfocused. She startles easily. Her joints click when she stands, and though she's young, her hands tremble faintly when she brushes them together. Will he love me? She finally asks. You almost drop your needlework. You glance up. Milady? She blinks, almost surprised she spoke, then repeats herself. Will my cousin love me? It's not the kind of question you expect from royalty. Love isn't usually part of the deal, but she's asking as though she thinks it could be, or hopes. You offer the safest answer you can. He will honour you, I'm sure. She smiles faintly. It doesn't reach her eyes. Like Uncle Heinrich honoured Aunt Greta, she spent most of her life in bed, whispering to the wall. There's a long pause. The silence sits between you like a sleeping hound. You wonder if Maria's heard the same stories you have, about Lady Therese, whose spine curved so severely they hid her away before guests arrived, or Countess Anna, who had 6 miscarriages before finally dying in childbirth at 17, or the Austrian princess who could trace her bloodline back 10 generations in 3 directions, but couldn't tie her own shoes because her fingers were fused. Experts still debate whether the Habsburgs fully grasped the biological risks of their marriage practices. Some argue they simply didn't have the medical framework to understand why so many children died or developed oddities. Others say they knew but didn't care. Power trumped health. Always. Maria doesn't say anything more. You help her into her shoes, then step aside as she walks to the chapel. Her steps are careful, slow, like she's afraid of breaking something invisible inside herself. On your way out, you pass a hallway lined with portraits. Women in stiff collars and heavy gowns, gazing solemnly into eternity. You recognise the jawlines, the drooping eyelids, the tiny, identical nostrils. They all look related, because they are. Very much so. You stop at one particular painting, Princess Elisabetta. Her eyes are unusually large, her mouth too small. She married her cousin at 16 and died at 19 from nervous complications. The records don't say more. You sigh and continue toward the kitchens, passing two younger maids giggling in a corner. They're comparing family charts like it's a card game. One more and it's a full set, one says. You chuckle despite yourself, then pause. Because deep down it's not funny. Not really. The castle is its own closed loop, a breathing, gilded system of repetition. Cousin marries cousin. Aunt gives birth to niece and daughter in one, all to preserve a name, a title, a crest. But what of Maria? Of her question? You want to believe her cousin might see her for who she is, might even love her. But the truth is, you've seen what comes next. The quiet decay, the twitching hands, the faded lineages clinging to a bloodline too tightly coiled to breathe. And still, each girl hopes that maybe this time things will be different. That love might interrupt the loop. Whisper 1 in the comments below if this tale charms your heart, or 2 if it sends shivers down your spine. The corridors grow colder as you pass into the inner chambers, where tapestries hang heavier and the air smells faintly of wax, mildew and something more. Ancestral. This is where you'll serve today, attending to Duchess Eleonora, who bathes only with rosewood and silence. You enter quietly. She's seated in her bathing tub, the water darkened with steeped herbs and thin strands of her own hair. You wait for her permission to approach, though she rarely speaks. A single nod is enough. Her skin is nearly translucent. Her back, pale as milk glass, is marked by the soft constellation of moles that matches her cousin's. You know this because you helped her cousin dress 2 weeks ago and saw the same pattern. Exactly the same. The tub is ornate, carved marble with golden lion feet, but the water is tepid. That's because Eleonora won't allow servants to add hot water after sunset. It unbalances the humours, she says. You smile, though you're sure her physicians made that rule up just to appease her. She lifts her chin slightly, asking with her eyes for you to brush her hair. As you do, the strands cling to your fingers, dry, brittle, delicate as flax, the same flax they use to spin royal linens. You wonder, not for the first time, if this is a feature of her bloodline or a sign of something worse. Everyone in the palace knows the Duchess's family tree doesn't branch much. Her mother and father were first cousins, and their parents, well, no one really knows, because half the names repeat. The archivist gave up organising the genealogy scrolls years ago. They just call it the loop. You ask her gently if she slept well. Her response is a whisper. I dreamt of children. There's no joy in the sentence, just distance. She's had 3 stillbirths in 4 years. The 4th pregnancy ended before the midwives were even summoned. And though no one says it aloud, the reason is spoken between sighs and lowered eyes. The blood is too close, too familiar, too folded in on itself. You rinse her hair, watching rivulets of water and oil curl down her back like golden vines. She once told you, months ago, that her husband had the same birthmark she did, on the inside of his left ankle. They discovered it on their wedding night. Neither of them laughed. They don't share a bed anymore. One physician quietly suggested they stop trying to conceive. Another, more devout, said it was God's will to continue. The bishop agreed. A noble womb is sacred, he pronounced, even when cracked. So they try, or rather they go through the motions. Duty and despair bundled tightly like ribbon on a gift no one wants to open. You help her from the bath and wrap her in cloth. Her joints pop softly as she stands. It sounds like parchment crinkling. She's only 32. As you dress her, she recounts a memory of her aunt, also named Eleonora, who once fainted during a ball and was carried out on a serving tray. They thought it was food poisoning. Later, a monk whispered it was blood confusion. That's not a medical term, but it fits. The Duchess chooses a blue velvet gown today, the one with gold embroidery shaped like vines and crowned skulls. You lace it tight, feeling her ribs beneath the fabric. She barely eats now. Food doesn't seem to stay in her. The kitchen staff tries everything, custard, stews, sweets with crushed violets, but they all come back untouched. You accompany her to the family gallery. It's a long hallway, paintings from floor to ceiling, hundreds of eyes watching, all with the same heavy lids and bowed lips. One frame, at first glance, looks like it might be her, but it's her great-grandmother, painted at 16. The resemblance is eerie. Do you think I look like her? Eleonora asks. You hesitate. The answer is yes. Uncomfortably so. Somewhat, you say, smoothing a curl near her temple. The same spirit, perhaps. She doesn't respond. You continue down the gallery. There are portraits of children who didn't live long enough for names, just infant number 3 or little Clara. Some wear crowns they never grew into. One was said to have been born with fused fingers and a twisted spine, but the artist gave her flawless skin and soft curls anyway. Historical records from this region are muddled, but scholars remain divided on how much of the physical decline in this royal house came from inbreeding versus poor nutrition, bad water, or disease. Some argue it was cumulative, a slow erosion, generation by generation, masked with brocade and silk until the bones began to speak. You return Eleonora to her chambers just before Vespers. She thanks you with a nod. Her voice today is too thin to manage even a single word. You're halfway down the corridor when another maid rushes past you, eyes wide. "It's starting again," she hisses. You follow her toward the nursery wing, past the chamber of yet another young bride. Barely 16, married last month to a cousin, who looks more like her mirror image. She's weeping. Again. That's the 3rd time this week. You lower your head and step away, knowing better than to intrude. The loop continues. The air in the western tower hangs still, as if even the breeze is wary of the family that resides here. You tread carefully. Your slippers barely whisper across the polished floor, because today you've been summoned to attend to Isabella of Portugal. Not the Grand Empress you may have read about in stories. No, but her quieter, shadowed namesake, who was born from a line that wound too tightly inward. Her chamber door creaks as you push it open, revealing a room so meticulously neat it feels unlived in. Curtains pulled to perfect symmetry, cushions fluffed and stacked. Not a speck of dust, not a stitch out of place. Everything is precisely arranged, except the woman sitting at the vanity. She's been staring at her reflection since dawn. You approach gently, your reflection joining hers in the mirror. 2 faces, one alive, one watching herself disappear. She doesn't look at you. Instead, she lifts a silver hand mirror and turns it slowly, as if hoping a different angle might reveal a different woman. "I dreamed I was someone else," she murmurs. "Someone without my grandmother's teeth." You want to say something comforting, but how do you compliment a mouth that's grown in unkindly? Her upper jaw juts out in a way that makes smiling difficult, and her lower one never quite catches up. It's not her fault. It's the jawline that made the Habsburgs famous. Portraits softened it, painters flattered it. But up close, it's an architectural oddity that dictates her whole face. She sets the mirror down. "Do you think he'll mind?" You don't need to ask who he is. Word around the palace is that a betrothal is imminent. Another cousin, older by 8 years, already rumoured to have noble blood and noble ailments, a limp and a persistent cough. Together their genetics will be a reunion party. You reply, "I think he'll admire your grace." She raises an eyebrow. "And my chin?" There's humour there, but a bitter kind. You change the subject quickly and help her into her gown, a pale green silk designed to distract the eye from her face. It doesn't work. Her expression remains quietly determined, like someone bracing for impact. Later, at the Great Hall, you stand nearby as she takes her place at the banquet table. The candlelight flickers across jewelled goblets, roasted meats, and silver platters. Conversation buzzes, but always in measured tones. No one ever speaks of illness or oddities or, heaven forbid, birth defects. Instead, they discuss lineage like it's a sport. "Did you know Count Wilhelm is twice descended from Maximilian's sister?" someone says. Another replies, "That makes him eligible for 3 thrones." Eligible, yes. But what of health, of vitality? Experts still debate whether the royal families truly believed their bloodlines were divine, or whether they were simply stuck in a system too politically dense to escape. Marrying within the family guaranteed loyalty. It also guaranteed that recessive traits weren't just passed along. They were invited, embroidered, and seated at the high table. Isabella tries to eat, but the roast is chewy. Her jaw makes the effort painful, visible. You catch her discreetly sliding bits under her napkin. She sips wine instead. Her cousin watches, eyes narrow, expression unreadable. He too has the look, sunken cheeks, drooping eyelids, that faintly waxy complexion of those born noble, but never quite hearty. After dinner, you help her up the spiral stair to her chamber. She leans on your arm more than usual. Her ankle's been acting up again. Another little oddity that runs through her line. Her sister had it too before she was sent to a convent. As you remove her earrings, delicate filigree shaped like ivy leaves, she looks at you suddenly, eyes sharp despite her fatigue. "Do you ever wonder," she says, "what I might have looked like if my parents weren't related?" You pause. Not because it's rude, but because no one has ever said it aloud before. She smiles then. Lopsided, imperfect, but real. "I think I might have had dimples." You nod, heart heavier than you expected. Tap 3 in the comments below if this story makes you smile, or 4 if it leaves you chilled. She lies back on her pillows. You draw the curtains and blow out the candles. The room fades into dark gold and hushed grey. You whisper goodnight and step into the corridor, closing the door behind you with the softest click. The silence that follows feels not empty, but resigned. And tomorrow, the mirror will be waiting again. The hallway toward the eastern vestibule smells faintly of lavender, lard, and lingering anxiety. You've been reassigned today. Your noble charge is the young Catherine of Austria. A quiet girl, rarely seen without a book or a rosary, and always surrounded by whispers of delicate constitution, which, in royal terms, is usually code for too inbred to function properly in public. You knock gently and let yourself into her chambers. Catherine is seated by the window, her embroidery hoop limp in her lap. You curtsy. She nods, but her gaze doesn't move from the square of sky beyond the glass. It's a flat grey today, almost indistinguishable from the stone walls. She's been watching a pair of pigeons for the last hour. You know this because the maid you're replacing told you with a roll of her eyes. You step forward to announce yourself, but Catherine speaks first. "Do pigeons marry their siblings?" she asks, utterly serious. You blink. "I'm not sure, milady." She finally looks at you then. "It would make sense, wouldn't it? If they never leave the tower, who else would they find?" That's when you realise she's not really asking about the birds. You prepare her for her public walk. That's what it's called, the Royal Promenade. It happens weekly. A performance of health and vitality for the court, a slow walk around the courtyard with chaperones and well-rehearsed nods. Catherine dreads it. You dress her carefully. Today's gown is a stiff, bone-coloured brocade with stiff sleeves and even stiffer expectations. Her waist is so narrow you can nearly lace it shut without effort, but her posture doesn't help. She slumps slightly, like the very idea of standing straight requires too much faith in herself. As you pin her hair, she winces. "Don't pull too hard," she says softly. "My scalp bruises." That's not something most people would admit. But Catherine is honest in a way that most royals aren't. Or maybe she just doesn't have the energy to pretend anymore. They say her mother had fragile bones and delicate skin, and her father a jaw so pronounced it interfered with speech. Both were grandchildren of the same emperor. Catherine inherited the worst of both. You help her to the promenade route, where nobility pretends not to stare. The sun peeks out briefly, and you catch the glint of judgment in someone's eyes. You notice a noblewoman whisper to her husband behind a fan. Catherine notices too. She always does. A gust of wind knocks her veil slightly askew. Her thin eyebrows knit together. Her teeth, too many for her small mouth, bite down on her lip in frustration. Later, back in her chambers, she asks the question so many royal women never voice aloud. "Do you think my children will be like me?" You pretend to straighten her gown's hem. "I think," you reply carefully, "they will be strong in spirit, like their mother." She almost smiles, but it doesn't last. She picks up her hand mirror and studies her teeth again. "They say I grind them at night," she murmurs. "Even in my sleep I try to correct them." You don't know what to say. Scholars remain divided on just how aware medieval and early modern royals were of the consequences of their tightly knit marriages. Some argue they noticed but were unwilling to acknowledge the pattern. Others think they believed any physical flaw was a test of divine strength, or worse, a necessary sacrifice to preserve lineage and control. But Catherine's flaws aren't just physical. She's been tutored in languages and dance, yet struggles to finish a sentence in company. Her hands tremble when she's asked to read aloud, and when alone she mumbles old prayers under her breath, half in Latin, half in some dream language only she understands. At night she keeps the candle lit, always. You once asked another maid why, and she answered, "She's afraid of forgetting who she is in the dark." You tuck Catherine into bed. She thanks you politely, though her tone is flat. As you turn to leave, she says something that stops you in your tracks. "If I ever have a daughter," she says, "I hope she's born a peasant." You look back, startled. She's staring at the ceiling. No paintings, no mirrors, no marriage contracts. Her voice softens into a whisper. Just stars. You close the door behind you, heart heavier than before. Down the corridor, another portrait waits, one of Catherine's grandmother, the same wide teeth, the same tilted smile, the same sad eyes painted to look proud. The resemblance is striking, and the silence it leaves behind, even more so. You've just come from Catherine's quiet chamber, your thoughts still tangled in the softness of her voice when you're summoned to the West Archives, a part of the castle rarely visited by anyone who isn't a scholar or an old man with a quill and bad eyesight. You weren't expecting to be pulled into genealogical duties today, but apparently there's a wedding coming up, and with that, the inevitable question, which Charles is the father of which Maria? You follow a steward down the narrow hall lined with old scrolls and family trees, some rolled so tightly they look more like weapons than records. The air here tastes like paper and time. You can practically smell the layers of repetition. Names echo off the parchment. Charles, Maria, Philip, Anne, Charles, Maria, Charles, Maria. It's less of a family tree and more of a family circle. An old archivist named Hugo greets you with a frown that's been stuck on his face for 40 years. He gestures toward a massive chart that's half painted, half mended, with tiny ink notes correcting previous generations' mistakes. You step closer, studying the names. Maria Theresa. Not the one you're thinking of. This one is the daughter of Charles Theg, or maybe Charles Thimth. It depends on which Maria she married. Or was it Charles Thorve? You're starting to understand why the scholars all seem a bit off. The archivist mutters, "We're running out of distinguishing markers. Too many Marias, too many Charleses." You're not here to fix the family, of course, just to help deliver a list to the seamstresses so they can start embroidering the correct initials on the wedding linens. But halfway through the chart, you lose your place entirely. There's a Charles who married a Maria, who was also the daughter of another Charles who married that Charles's sister. Another Maria. At this point, you're less concerned with bloodlines, and more with how they managed to keep dinner conversations straight. "Do they ever get confused?" you ask Hugo. He chuckles darkly. "Only when they die." The marriage arrangements in this house are less romantic than strategic. It's not about love, it's about proximity and politics. And proximity, well, that includes blood. In the Habsburg court especially, cousin marriages weren't just accepted, they were institutionalized. Uncle-niece marriages were rarer but still known. And all for the sake of land, power, and keeping outsiders out of royal veins. Experts still debate whether anyone raised concerns at the time, beyond the occasional clergyman or whispering midwife. Some records show attempts to bring in foreign noble blood. Others suggest it was simply too late. The gene pool had already become more of a puddle. You trace the line from one Charles to a Maria to a Philip to a Maria back to Charles. Somewhere in that tangle there's a wedding scheduled for next spring. The bride is barely 14. The groom, a cousin with a limp and a gaze that slides past you like oil on marble. You remember seeing them together once in the chapel. They were kneeling in prayer, her eyes closed, his scanning the altar as if hoping a divine exit might open up behind the crucifix. You wonder if she even knows the truth, that her handsome cousin was once described in court letters as the result of deliberate compression of nobility. You hand Hugo the final transcription list and excuse yourself. The family tree is giving you a headache. Outside, you pause beneath a tapestry depicting St. Helena and the Holy Cross. The saint's embroidered face looks a bit too familiar. That nose, those eyes. You'd bet half your wages that she was modelled after one of the royal Marias. You make your way back to the great hall where two young noble girls are practicing curtsies. You recognise the older one, Maria Sophia, daughter of Charles Leopold. Or maybe Leopold Charles. Either way, she's betrothed to someone with the same surname. That's not unusual, it's tradition. She asks if you'd like to see her dance steps. You nod politely. She twirls, nearly trips, then laughs. Her sister claps. They're sweet, innocent, unaware of the web they've been born into. "Do you think I'll look like Mama when I'm big?" she asks breathlessly. You nod again, a little slower this time. Her mother, after all, is the one with the identical nose and the limp. Later that evening, as the castle settles into silence, you pass a hallway of marble busts, each labelled with a name that's been used at least 6 times. You run your fingers along the cool stone of one, Charles IV. or maybe Charles Verth. The face is familiar. Of course it is. You've seen it a dozen times, alive and sculpted. This isn't a dynasty. It's a loop. A wheel carved from alabaster and lined with the same name, again and again. And you're just trying to keep the linens labelled correctly. The chapel bells chime 9 times, slow and ponderous, as you make your way toward the upper sanctuary. You've been summoned for a special occasion today. Not a coronation or a christening, but a wedding. A royal one, a sacred one, and, as everyone who knows anything is already whispering behind their lace gloves, a scandalous one. Though in this family, scandalous has long since lost its meaning. You clutch the satin hem of your service dress as you step inside the ornate incense-heavy hall. The marble floor is freshly polished. The walls are alive with frescoes of saints, whose expressions feel increasingly uncomfortable the more you look at them. Maybe it's because they too are being forced to witness what's about to unfold, a prince marrying his sister. You blink. Yes, his actual biological sister. You've heard of cousin marriages, of course. They're practically a requirement in this castle. But this feels different, bolder, more defiant. And yet, here you are, one of many well-dressed shadows lining the aisle, watching the courtiers file in with perfect posture and barely concealed unease. The music starts. A lute, a pipe, a low drum beat that feels more like a funeral than a wedding. You can smell the wax melting on the ceremonial candles, thick, slow and floral, like trying to mask something rotten. She walks in first, the bride, slim, solemn, and draped in ivory silk that weighs nearly half her body. Her expression is unreadable, a blank mask of nobility. You think you catch a flicker of hesitation behind her eyes, but it vanishes as quickly as it comes. Then comes the groom, tall, elegant, and unmistakably her mirror. Their features nearly identical. Same prominent nose, same heavy lids, same downturn at the corners of their mouths. You'd be forgiven for thinking you were looking at a wedding portrait painted with one face, copied twice. And the crowd, they rise to their feet. Some smile, some nod, some clap, but gently, as if still unsure whether this is a cause for celebration or dread. You glance at the bishop, who clears his throat before beginning the ceremony. His hands tremble slightly as he opens the sacred book. You imagine he had to revise a few lines for this one. In holy matrimony, joined not by desire alone, but by divine right and family allegiance. You barely hear the rest. The words melt into the thick air as your gaze locks on the bride's fingers, which grip her bouquet of pressed violets a little too tightly. Somewhere behind you, 2 noblewomen whisper, "They share everything, don't they?" "Blood, bed, and burden," the other replies. You look around. No one stops the ceremony. No one gasps in horror. This isn't a surprise. This has been planned for years, maybe even since the cradle. The family saw it as efficient, logical. Why send a daughter to marry a stranger when there's already a son with the right name, right blood, right nose? Of course, they've made sure to get a papal dispensation. Everything is legal, on paper, but spiritually, socially, medically, well, that's another matter. Scholars remain divided on just how common true sibling marriages were among European royalty. While ancient dynasties, Egypt comes to mind, embraced the practice more openly, medieval Europe preferred cousin unions. Still, a few cases of sibling marriage did occur, usually cloaked under elaborate legal and ecclesiastical justifications. Often, the real reason was simple: to consolidate power. You watch the rings exchanged. The priest's voice wavers only once. The couple doesn't flinch. They've been trained for this, groomed for it. Literally. After the ceremony, you join the servants lining the walls of the feast hall. The wedding banquet is spread like a battlefield. Golden roast fowl, sugared fruit towers, and moulded jelly in the shape of lions and swans. The newlyweds sit side by side beneath an enormous embroidered crest, which now includes both of their initials, though, to be fair, they were already the same. The toasts begin. Lords and ladies raise their goblets and praise the union. "Strength in unity," one cries. "Long live the house," shouts another. No one mentions what everyone is thinking. This house is folding in on itself. You catch the bride glancing at her brother-husband. He smiles faintly. It's a soft, strange smile, as if he's relieved the hardest part is over. But deep down you wonder if they know what's coming. The miscarriages, the illnesses, the whispers, the children. if there are any, bearing the weight of a bloodline that has nowhere left to go but inward. You slip away early, your appetite gone. In the hallway you pass a tapestry of the family's founding couple, long dead, long revered. They look noble, regal, hands entwined, and yes, they too are cousins. This is simply the next logical step. Morning comes with a whimper, not a shout. The castle lies in that soft, cottony stillness just after dawn, when the fires haven't been rekindled and the chill still clings to the floor like a second skin. You wrap your shawl tighter and make your way toward the lower chambers. Today's assignment is laundry, which in this household doesn't just mean linens and cloaks. It also means the sheets from the royal wing, sheets that smell faintly of perfume, sweat, and sometimes blood. You arrive just in time to see a maid named Lisbeth heaving a bundle into a copper basin, her arms trembling from effort. You help her untangle it. Pale silk, expensive, embroidered with a crest, one of the royal children's. Except this child never lived past her first breath. Lisbeth doesn't speak at first, then quietly she mutters, "They say the baby was blue." You don't ask who they are. You both know. Everyone in the servants' wing knows. When a birth goes wrong, the rumour arrives faster than the midwife. And in this family it's been happening more and more. Lisbeth adds lye to the water, stirs and watches bubbles rise. Third stillbirth this winter, from 3 different brides. You nod, trying not to look too shaken. It's becoming a pattern, one even the cooks have noticed. The nobles won't speak of it, of course. They say the mothers are frail, the air is bad, or the stars were unkind. Anything but the truth. The bloodlines are crumbling. You carry a fresh bundle to the rinsing table. As you shake it out, a tiny stitched monogram catches your eye. MT, sewn with thread so fine it's barely visible. That would be Maria Theresa, the youngest Duchess bride. She's 15, and already pale from 2 miscarriages. In the corner, one of the older washerwomen mutters a prayer under her breath. "Lord preserve the line," she says, but it sounds more like resign than preserve. Later that day, you find yourself back in the great hall lighting the lanterns before evening court. The windows are high, arched and cold with condensation. You glance up at the long portraits hanging above the throne dais. They tower over the room, painted stiff and solemn. Dukes, duchesses, emperors and countesses, all thin, pale, angular, and most of them look tired. You can almost trace the same pair of eyes through 5 generations. It's as if no new features are allowed. In the corner, you spot the newest painting, one that hasn't yet been framed. It's of the current queen, seated stiffly in brocade, hands clasped in her lap. Her expression is pleasant but strained, the corners of her mouth refusing to cooperate with the painter's brush. Her eyes look past you, as if she's half here, half drifting somewhere far away. She's pregnant again. Everyone knows, but few expect the child to live. You pass a pair of noblemen in conversation. "Her Grace has been confined again," one says. "Doctors recommend bed rest," says the other, "and prayer." They don't mention that the Queen's last child was born without a properly formed rib cage, or that before that she delivered twins joined at the spine. No one mentions the word inbreeding, though it hovers in the air like a spectre. Instead, they talk about purity, about heritage, about God's chosen bloodline. Scholars remain divided on how much royal courts were willing to acknowledge physical degeneration. Some argue that chronic illness and deformities were simply written off as divine trials. Others claim that every time a stillbirth occurred, a new excuse was added to the official scroll: bad omens, contaminated water, or improper posture during the 3rd trimester. You tidy the cushions on the main chairs, trying not to think about how many noble children never made it to these seats. Later that evening, you return to the royal nursery to fetch a discarded shawl. The nursemaid is singing softly to one of the infants, this one healthy, at least for now. The child sleeps, mouth open, tiny hands curled. You watch her chest rise and fall. You hope she keeps doing that. On your way out, you pass the crib of another child. This one is swaddled in silence. The curtains around the cradle are closed. No singing. You don't ask questions, but your stomach knots. Even the midwives are running out of explanations. Their hushed conversations are filled with words like unusual, fragile, and not quite formed. And while official announcements speak of peace and prosperity, the birth records tell another story, one of missing names, erased details, and an alarming number of infants buried without ever being baptized. There's something terrifying about silence in a nursery, especially when it becomes normal. You pass a final portrait on the way back to your quarters, one of a queen who lived 2 centuries ago. She's surrounded by 10 children, painted in soft pastels, all holding flowers. Historical records suggest only 3 of them lived past the age of 5, and even those weren't quite whole. The upper gallery is still tonight, save for the slow groan of wooden beams overhead and the faint shuffle of your own steps echoing down the corridor. You're delivering a tray of warm broth to a chamber most servants avoid after dark, the private quarters of Juana la Loca, as they call her now. Juana the Mad. You've never said that name aloud, not once. Not because of fear, but out of some unspoken, inherited courtesy. Because no one quite agrees on what broke her, and even fewer dare to say who might have built the cracks. You've never seen her up close before, only heard stories, that she whispers to shadows, that she still believes her husband is alive, that she insists on keeping his coffin in the room with her. You assumed that last part was exaggeration, until now. You push the door open quietly, tray in hand, and step into the gloom. The room is colder than the rest of the castle, not from weather but from time. Thick curtains block out moonlight, tapestries hang half-covered, neglected, and the scent inside isn't entirely of lavender or incense. It's something deeper, darker. Beneath the carved archway at the far end of the chamber rests a long, ornate box, lacquered black draped in embroidered crimson. The coffin. You weren't prepared to see it, and yet there it is. Juana sits beside it, hair down, eyes wide. She turns toward you slowly, as if pulled by an invisible string. "He's sleeping," she says. "Don't wake him." You nod, careful not to glance too long at the box. You place the tray on a table and lower your head in deference. She rises then, tall and thin, wearing a robe that seems to weigh more than she does. Her bare feet make no sound on the rug. She moves to the coffin and lays a hand upon it. "He used to sing to me," she whispers, "in Castilian. Do you speak Castilian?" You shake your head gently. "No matter. He'll teach you. One day." You realize then, Juana is not merely grieving. She's suspended, frozen in time, clinging to a love story that everyone else closed the book on years ago. And yet, you can't quite dismiss her. Not entirely. Because there's something heartbreakingly precise about her movements. The way she straightens the embroidered pillow on the nearby chair. The way she hums a lullaby that probably hasn't been sung aloud in decades. The way she speaks of her husband in the present tense, as though grief has carved out its own reality. History tells us Juana of Castile was the daughter of Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand, and that she inherited both their power and their burden. Her husband, Philip the Handsome, died suddenly, possibly of typhoid, though theories vary. After his death, Juana's mind unravelled. Or so the story goes, but scholars remain divided on the cause. Some argue she was always fragile, born under the weight of dynastic expectation and the Habsburg gene pool. Others believe she was never truly mad, only manipulated, a political inconvenience, sidelined and labelled insane to make way for male successors. And yet, when you see her here now, cradling a gold-stitched cloak to her chest like it still holds warmth, it's hard to believe she's anything but lost. You try to leave quietly, but she stops you with a gesture. "Do you think love dies?" she asks. You hesitate, then, "No, milady." "Good." She smiles faintly. "Because I can still hear him breathing. At night." You lower your gaze. There's no sound from the coffin. None. But she closes her eyes and leans close, listening with the devotion of a saint beside a relic. As you back out of the room, she begins humming again. A lullaby? A wedding tune? You can't tell. The melody is haunting, beautiful, and ever so slightly off-key. Once the door clicks shut, you exhale for the first time in minutes. Other maids have told stories. That Juana occasionally opens the coffin, that she speaks to it for hours, that one night a visiting noble caught her singing to a lock of hair she swore was still warm, that another time she lashed out at a physician who tried to remove the casket, screaming, "You'll take my heart before you take his!" No one speaks of her in the present tense anymore, except herself. You wonder what madness really means in this castle, where so many are born with too many chromosomes, too few antibodies, and far too much legacy. Maybe Juana isn't mad at all. Maybe she's the only one who sees how broken everything is. Maybe grief, like bloodlines, just folds in on itself tighter and tighter until it can no longer breathe. The torches flicker nervously along the upper corridor as you carry the fresh linens toward the same chamber you swore you wouldn't return to. And yet, here you are, summoned again, this time not by a maid or steward, but by Juana herself. A hand-delivered note neatly written, though smudged near the edges as if the ink had wept. "I'll need new blankets. He gets cold at night." Your hands tremble slightly as you push the heavy wooden door open once more. The chamber is as you left it. Dark, still, suspended in some fragile spell. The curtains are drawn. The air is heavy with incense that hasn't been refreshed in days. The coffin remains where it was, but now a tapestry has been placed behind it, depicting St. Veronica offering her veil to Christ. Except, it looks vaguely like Juana. The cheekbones, perhaps. She's seated in her usual chair, facing the coffin. A small bowl of broth sits untouched on the nearby table. The air smells faintly of cloves and old velvet. You approach slowly and begin folding the fresh blankets. As you move, your eyes flicker toward the coffin, though you don't want them to. You can't help it. This time, something has changed. There's a ring placed on top of the casket now, a man's ring, large and golden, the kind worn by princes and poets. "He forgot it," she says, softly. You glance at her. She's looking at the ring the way most people look at a beloved dog that's long passed, equal parts affection and ache. You murmur, "Would you like me to warm more soup, milady?" She shakes her head. No, he prefers quiet. That word again. He. Always present. Always just resting. You can't stop your curiosity. Carefully, respectfully, you ask, "Milady, would you like company tonight?" She turns to you slowly, her face pale but serene. "Do you believe in waiting?" You nod, unsure if that's the right answer. "Good," she whispers, "because I've been waiting since they took him from the carriage. They said he died, but I knew better. He just needed to be still for a while." Her words come softly, yet with such certainty it chills you. No hesitation, no self-doubt. Just devotion turned rigid with time. They say madness runs through this family, not as a sudden storm, but as a slow drip, generation to generation, a quiet folding of logic until only the rituals remain. Juana eats little, sleeps in pieces, refuses music unless it's something he once hummed. Her ladies-in-waiting are rotated constantly because few can endure her long silences. Or worse, her attempts at small talk with someone who isn't there. One girl reportedly fainted after hearing Juana whisper to the coffin, "Shall we dance, my love?" and then begin to sway alone in the candlelight. Scholars still debate the exact nature of her condition. Some say schizophrenia. Others suggest catatonic depression. A few believe she simply broke under the unbearable pressure of royal life, raised to be a queen, then widowed too young, and gaslighted by powerful men who benefited from her silence. But there's another theory, one the scholars don't print, but the servants pass along in low voices. She sees things the rest of us avoid. Maybe Juana isn't sick. Maybe she's just aware, painfully aware, that the love she was offered was conditional, that her children were raised by others, that her titles were stripped with a pen stroke and a priest's nod. And so she chose to live beside the only person who never asked her to be anything other than herself, even in death. You glance toward the coffin again, heart thudding softly. The embroidered cloth hasn't moved. Of course it hasn't, but the shadows seem longer in here. Juana speaks once more, her voice smaller than before. "Some say love dies, but I don't believe that. I think it forgets how to walk, so we carry it." You nod, not because you fully understand, but because it feels like the only right thing to do. You lay the new blankets across the back of her chair. Soft wool, the finest weave. She doesn't look at them, only at the ring. You retreat without a word, slipping through the doorway and into the corridor like a breath escaping a sealed room. Later, you pass a nobleman chuckling about the Queen's mad daughter. "She was always peculiar," he says, "even before the burial." You keep walking, because you know better now. Juana isn't mad. She's mourning, actively, fiercely, unapologetically. And this castle, the one built on marriages between cousin and cousin, uncle and niece, repetition and decay, should be so lucky to have a heart that refuses to forget. The castle harbour groans beneath a stiff northern wind as you step onto the gangplank, following a line of noble trunks and overstuffed luggage marked with the royal sigil. Today you're accompanying Maria Anna, the newest of the archduchesses, on her wedding voyage to Bavaria. A marriage arranged before her first moon cycle. A cousin match, of course, and as you're about to learn, one with more than just emotional baggage. She's standing at the rail of the ship, veil wrapped around her shoulders, staring at the icy water as if she's hoping it might whisper another option. Her lips are pale, her knuckles even paler. "Are you cold, milady?" you ask gently, approaching with a shawl. She doesn't answer, just keeps watching the waves slap angrily against the hull. You drape the shawl across her shoulders anyway, careful not to disturb the intricate lacework of her collar, a gift from the groom's mother, who is also her aunt. Naturally, the voyage is supposed to last 3 days, but the captain has warned of storms. You settle in below deck with the rest of the ladies in waiting, where the air is thick with salt and perfume and suppressed nausea. Maria Anna doesn't speak the entire first day. By the second, she's violently seasick. You hold her hair back as she leans over a silver basin, her embroidered sleeves trembling with each heave. The other women pretend not to watch. They've seen noble brides vomit on voyages before, but this is different. This isn't just motion sickness, it's dread, coiling its fingers around her stomach. "She hasn't eaten," whispers one maid. "She hasn't spoken," whispers another. You nod silently. Her silence feels heavier than the sea. That evening you try to bring her broth. She turns her face away. "I'm marrying my cousin," she says suddenly, voice dry as parchment. "He has the same nose as my brother." You set the bowl down carefully. There's no correct reply to that. She lies on the cot, pale as the linens, eyes fixed on the wooden beams above. "Do you think I'll look like his sister? When I cry?" The candle sputters in the draught. You shake your head softly. "I think you'll look like yourself." She doesn't believe you. Later that night a storm hits. The ship groans like a wounded animal. You hold onto your cot as it bucks beneath you, and hear someone retching again in the shadows. It might be Maria Anna. It might be you. Scholars remain divided on the psychological toll such arranged inbred marriages took on these young women. While some letters survive, quiet pleas for escape, hints of nervous collapse, many more were either censored or lost. The official records remain polite, formal, and utterly sterile. She was wed in good faith. She bore 3 sons. She died in childbed. As if those sentences explain everything, but they don't tell you about the voyage, or the cold, or the dreams. By the 3rd day the sea calms. A pale dawn leaks through the cloud cover. Bavaria's coast is visible on the horizon, sharp-roofed castles and snow-laced pines, a new cage with better wallpaper. Maria Anna stands beside you again at the rail, her colours returning slightly, but her mouth remains set in a hard line. "They say he has seizures," she murmurs. "My cousin, my husband-to-be." You nod slowly. "My aunt says it's nothing. A delicate fit from time to time." You nod again. "She said his mother had them too, and her sister, but not to worry." This time, you don't nod. She doesn't cry. Not once. Even when the castle looms ahead, its towers sharp like teeth in a jaw that's been passed down too many times. Even when the banners go up and the trumpets sound and the steward calls her name in a voice too loud for the morning, you help her into her best gown, ice blue, trimmed in ermine. Her hands shake as you lace the back. "Do you think he'll like me?" she whispers. You want to say yes. But you've seen the family portraits, and you know what happens next. So instead, you reach for the brooch she never wears, the one with her mother's portrait inside, and pin it to her bodice. "He'll see your strength," you say. She doesn't smile, but her shoulders square just slightly. And as the ship docks and she steps into her new life, one cousin's name becoming another, you silently vow to remember this moment, the voyage, the silence, the fear, because no one else will. The Alps rise around you like frozen ghosts, their jagged peaks biting into the sky as you travel with the wedding retinue deeper into Bavarian territory. The cold has settled into your bones, a kind of frost you can't shake, and it seems to mirror the atmosphere inside the carriage, where Maria Anna sits in silence across from you, barely blinking. You've been travelling for hours, through pine-shadowed valleys, across icy rivers, past villages where peasants stop and stare, unsure whether to cheer or cross themselves. After all, they've seen these processions before. Nobles arriving in fine velvets, only to vanish behind castle walls that hush their names and shorten their lives. Maria Anna is still pale, still tight-lipped. Her fingers rest in her lap like forgotten embroidery needles, motionless and cold. You notice she hasn't removed her gloves once since you crossed the border. Whether it's the cold or something else, you can't say. She murmurs, "My new chamber has no south window." You look at her, puzzled. She continues, "They say the sun never reaches that side of the castle. The last duchess there kept birds just so she'd hear something alive." You don't know how to answer that, so you ask if she'd like some wine. She shakes her head. The carriage rattles over a patch of uneven stone. She doesn't flinch. When you finally arrive at the new court, a towering grey structure squatting against the mountainside, the mood is muted. No music plays. No crowds greet you. Just a few soldiers, a steward with a tight smile, and a pair of priests waiting to bless the marriage. You help Maria Anna from the carriage, and she walks toward the entry hall with the cautious dignity of someone approaching not a husband but a sentence. Inside, you're escorted to her new quarters, high-ceilinged, dim, and predictably cold. Tapestries depicting hunts and martyrdoms line the walls, their faded colours barely disguising the mildew. There are servants here, of course, locals. They nod politely but keep their distance. One girl whispers as you pass, "She's the one with the cousin groom, isn't she?" You settle Maria Anna into her chambers, unpacking the trunk slowly. She sits at the edge of the bed, unmoving. Then she asks suddenly, "Do you think this place has ghosts?" You pause. "Most old castles do, milady." She nods once. "Good. Then I won't be lonely." That night, as you help her dress for the formal greeting dinner, she gazes into the mirror for a long time. Longer than she ever did back home. You can see it in her eyes. How she's comparing herself to every woman who came before. The jawlines, the ears, the tilt of the eyebrows, the shared features looping through generations like a pattern in brocade that never gets unpicked. "Will I go mad here?" she asks suddenly. Your hands freeze on her collar ribbon. You want to lie. But the truth slips out. "I don't know." She nods again. There's no emotion in it. Just resignation. A woman preparing herself for a kind of sleepwalking. At the dinner, she sits beside her cousin husband. You've only glimpsed him briefly, Prince Ludwig, but it's enough. He has the same sloped forehead and gentle lisp that ran through his mother's line. When he speaks, it's halting, measured. You notice his hands tremble slightly when he lifts his goblet. You wonder what he thinks of her, if he notices the similarities, the mirrored expressions, the matching thin wrists and narrow feet. Or maybe he doesn't see her at all. Maybe she's just the next Maria Anna on a scroll that will someday be archived, labelled neatly, married 1701, died 1707, 2 children, 1 survived. The music is soft. The food smells of clove and game meat. She eats very little. You catch her looking out the high, narrow window, toward the part of the mountain where the sun never shines. Experts still debate whether court physicians in places like Bavaria ever advised against repeated consanguineous marriages. Some documents suggest concern, others show silence. And silence, as you've learned here, is as hereditary as the jawline. Back in her chamber, Maria Anna removes her veil and hands it to you wordlessly. You fold it carefully, aware that no embroidery in the world could soften what this place has already begun to do to her. She sits again at the edge of the bed. "I think I'll start keeping birds," she says. "At least they sing." You nod. "I can help you find a cage, milady." "No cage," she says quietly. "I won't put anything else behind bars." The wind whistles outside. Inside, the air is too still, and you wonder, as you tuck her in, whether Bavaria just gained a bride, or buried a girl who will slowly forget she ever had a voice. The morning air in Bavaria bites through your sleeves as you shuffle across the icy flagstones toward the eastern nursery wing, basket in hand. You've been sent to deliver a new set of gowns for the young Infanta Margaret Teresa, a child so protected, so cloistered, and so eerily self-contained that the maids whisper her name with more reverence than affection. She's not like other children. But then again, no one really expected her to be. You arrive at her door. 2 guards step aside, too heavily armoured for a corridor where the loudest sound is usually the scratch of quills or the crinkle of fine lace. You knock, then enter. And there she is. sitting upright on a stool carved from dark oak, hands folded neatly, expressionless except for a tiny crease above her nose. Her dress is a masterpiece, layer upon layer of silk and satin in pale blue and ivory, weighed down with embroidery so fine you could go cross-eyed trying to trace it. She doesn't move, she simply looks at you. You curtsy. She blinks once, permission granted. You unpack the basket and begin laying out her wardrobe. Delicate shifts, new slippers, a cloak trimmed with fur soft enough to make your fingers ache. All made to protect a child from the world. Or perhaps to protect the world from the child. Her governess watches silently from the corner. She's not old, but she looks exhausted, like someone who's had to whisper too many bedtime stories to a face that never changed expression. You kneel beside Margaret Teresa to help her change. As you unbutton her bodice, you notice the skin beneath is paper white and unusually stiff. Her arms don't relax. She doesn't giggle or fidget like most children her age. She just sits there, porcelain still, eyes wide and faintly glassy. And for a moment you feel like you're dressing a doll. You glance up. The portrait above the fireplace is of her mother, also named Maria. Same eyes, same bone structure, same immobile serenity. A face carved from the same mould. You've seen that mould repeated again and again through the generations. A face that was once noble, now uncanny. You finish the buttons and slip new shoes onto Margaret's feet. She doesn't thank you. She doesn't need to. Royal children aren't raised to express gratitude. They're raised to represent. You step back as she's lifted from her stool and placed on the little platform at the far end of the chamber. A painter is already waiting, brushes ready. He bows deeply. "Hold still, my lady," he says. She already is. He begins. First the sketch, then the outlines, then the dabs of colour, soft pastels to give her skin that pale, ethereal glow. But you notice something odd. He's exaggerating her eyes, making them wider, making her cheeks rounder, smoothing over the stiffness, replacing reality with the illusion of health. And for a moment, you wonder if anyone will ever see the real child again. Historical records portray Margaret Teresa as charming, delicate, a symbol of dynastic hope. She was betrothed to her uncle before she could write her name. Her portraits survive in droves, most famously by Velázquez, who captured her not just as a child, but as an icon. But scholars remain divided on the accuracy of those depictions. Was she truly robust? Or was the brush doing more lifting than the child's body ever could? The painter pauses. The child hasn't blinked in several minutes. He nods with approval. "She's perfect," he whispers, more to himself than anyone else. You shiver slightly, not from cold, but from the realization that perfection, here, is measured in stillness. Later that afternoon, you help Margaret Teresa walk the short path to the garden courtyard. A formality. 15 minutes in the sun, then back inside. Her steps are small, cautious. You can feel the weight of her dress tugging at her spine. She stops by a bush of winter roses, reaches out, not to pick one, to touch one, just for a second. It's the first movement that hasn't been choreographed, and when her hand pulls back, you see the faintest smear of blood on her fingertip. A thorn. She doesn't cry. She just looks at it, puzzled, like someone encountering sensation for the first time. You quickly press a handkerchief to her finger. She whispers, "Do dolls bleed?" You don't answer, because you don't know. That evening, as you undress her, she stares straight ahead. "Uncle says I'll be beautiful forever," she says. Your throat tightens. "Yes, milady. But he also says I'll never grow." She's 7. You tuck her into bed beneath silk sheets that smell faintly of violets and mothballs. Outside, the wind howls against the tower. Inside, the little girl lies still, hair fanned across the pillow like spun sugar, mouth slightly open, hands folded just so. She looks perfect. She looks painted. She looks like she's already becoming a memory. The bells chime a hesitant melody somewhere below as you hurry across the castle courtyard with a tray of candied figs, bound for the royal nursery. But you don't make it. Halfway there, you're stopped by a steward, breathless and pale. "The prince needs assistance," he says. "Now." You pivot without question, because when it's Carlos, you move. Carlos Thun, the child king, the one who was born tired, as the nurses say when they think no one's listening, the one whose birth was heralded with fireworks, but whose body was met with quiet concern the moment he failed to cry. You follow the steward to the inner chambers. Rich velvet curtains hang heavy with the smell of lavender and lye, trying to mask something more clinical, something frail. Carlos is there, seated in a high-back chair beside the fire, his tiny frame nearly swallowed by it. He's 6 years old now, but his limbs are thin, his complexion grey-blue. His eyes, dull but constantly moving, scan the room as you approach. He coughs, once. It sounds like it comes from the bottom of a well. You kneel before him. "Good morning, Your Majesty." He blinks, then nods, slowly, deliberately. "Shoes," he whispers, barely audible. "Ah, of course." Today is a formal procession day. He's expected to walk, even if just from his room to the antechamber, for the sake of appearances, for the sake of image. But Carlos cannot tie his own shoes. He cannot rise without help. You've seen clay dolls with better muscle tone. As you slide his tiny velvet slippers onto his feet, you can feel the strange angles of his bones beneath the silk socks. His ankles turn inward. His legs don't straighten fully. You tie the bows slowly, gently. He coughs again, this time longer. You look up. "Would you like to stay seated, Majesty?" He tries to nod, but his head tips too far forward. His nurse rushes over and lifts it back. "He didn't sleep," she murmurs. "He never sleeps." You've heard the whispers, that Carlos was born with a long list of ailments: enlarged tongue, weak muscles, difficulty chewing, delayed speech, and constant fatigue. Some say he cannot digest properly. Others believe he has seizures in his sleep, though no one dares call them that. The official line is that he is delicate, but everyone in the palace knows the truth. Carlos is the end of the line, the last true Habsburg heir, the final loop in a bloodline that's been folding back on itself for centuries. The old midwife once said it plainly. You cannot build a child from the same 5 ancestors and expect him to run. Scholars remain divided on the precise condition Carlos suffered from. Some suggest multiple syndromes compounded by inbreeding, perhaps hydrocephalus, combined with mandibular prognathism and developmental delay. Others say he had none of these things separately, only the combined cost of a family tree that spiraled into itself. You gently lift Carlos into his procession robe. He blinks slowly again. His nurse whispers, "He tried to say a prayer this morning, but he forgot the words halfway through." You place the ceremonial sash across his chest. He tries to smile. The effect is haunting. By mid-morning he's wheeled into the side gallery where members of court have gathered to admire the strength of the crown. Everyone claps politely. A few nod solemnly. No one dares speak first. Carlos sits in his chair, tiny hands resting in his lap, crown slightly askew. A pigeon outside lands on the windowsill. He turns his head to follow it. That, somehow, is the most animated thing he does all morning. Later, you help him back to his bed. He lies down slowly. His breathing is shallow. You remove his shoes again and place them neatly at the foot of the bed. He looks at you and for the first time speaks a full sentence. Why is everything heavy? You don't know how to answer that. So you tuck the blanket around him and lie. Because you're growing strong, Majesty. He closes his eyes. But you know better. So do the doctors. So do the nurses. So do the priests. The king is not growing stronger. The king is growing fainter. And still, they paint portraits of him with rosy cheeks and bright eyes. Still, they print coins with his face on them. Still, they write proclamations declaring a prosperous future. But behind the doors, you help tie the shoes of a child who might never run, never rule, never even finish a full night's sleep. And with every thread you pull tight, you feel it, the unraveling. One loop too many. One name too many times. You wake early, earlier than usual, with a summons slid under your door on crisp parchment. Just 3 words in fine ink. Chamber of Physicians. That's not a place most servants visit, and certainly not alone. But curiosity and duty draw you through the palace's quieter wing, past locked cabinets of tinctures and dried herbs, to the suite reserved for the royal medical staff. Inside, the fire crackles low. The scent of boiled linen and clove oil clings to every surface. You're greeted not by a doctor, but by a monkish scribe hunched over a desk, copying notes from one journal into another. Behind him, a heavy velvet curtain divides the room. The curtain shifts, and from behind it steps Dr. Valerio, the court physician, notorious for his discretion, his baldness, and his ability to say devastating things with a smile. He nods politely. "You're the girl who assists with Carlos, yes?" You bow. "We're revisiting his diagnosis," he says. "There's concern among the elders that the humours are misaligned." There it is again. Humours. That mystical word so often tossed around when no one dares speak plainly. You suppress the urge to ask, which humours explain a tongue too big for a mouth, or bones that grow in the wrong direction? Instead you ask, is he unwell? The doctor chuckles. He's royal. You glance behind the curtain. There's a narrow bed, and in it, sprawled under a mountain of wool, is a cousin of Carlos, another boy prince from a nearby branch of the family tree. His eyes twitch beneath closed lids. His fingers curl oddly. "This one's new," Valerio says, almost casually. "Third child from the Austria line this year. Same symptoms." You stare at the boy. He can't be more than 4. You recognise the jaw. Valerio steps closer and flips open a leather-bound tome. Charts, sketches, lists of symptoms, swollen tongue, narrow palate, delayed cognition, difficulty swallowing, weak ankles. He rattles them off like reading a shopping list. You scan the page. A note in the margin catches your eye. Mother and father, first cousins, their parents also cousins, shared great-grandparents. Your stomach turns. Valerio closes the book and places it back on the shelf. "We're still calling it melancholia in public, of course," he says. "Much neater." "Is it inherited?" you ask quietly. His smile fades just a little. "Let's say it's condensed legacy." You leave the chamber shaken. Later that day, you're summoned to help dress Carlos again. He's sitting up this time, scribbling clumsily with a piece of charcoal on a waxboard. You peer over his shoulder. He's drawn a figure, lopsided and strange. A person with too many arms, or perhaps too few. "Is that your cousin?" you ask gently. He shrugs, exhausted by even the movement of his neck. You tie his sash. He coughs again. Down the corridor, a woman is giving birth. You can hear it through the walls, muffled screams, barking orders, the sharp ring of metal against basin. Another royal child on the way, another potential condensed legacy. The midwives will announce it as a joy, regardless of what they see. As you finish dressing Carlos, you think of the other children you've tended. The ones who couldn't walk, the ones who went blind by 12, the one who, they say, never spoke a single word in her life, though she could hum lullabies almost perfectly. You help Carlos to his feet. He grips your hand tightly, too tightly. His strength comes in sudden, panicked bursts, like he's trying to prove something, though to whom, even he doesn't know. "Will I have children?" he asks suddenly. The question stops you cold. You glance at him, so small, so weary, so not ready for the weight of that answer. "I think," you say carefully, "you will have stories." He nods. You don't know if he understands. Later you overhear 2 nobles in the gallery. "We must protect the line," one says, "even if it breaks them." "Better broken than diluted," replies the other. They clink their goblets. You carry that phrase with you for the rest of the day. Better broken than diluted. It echoes louder than Carlos's coughs, louder than the silence that follows a difficult birth, louder than the scrape of your boots on the marble floor. Scholars today still argue whether the royals of the era fully understood what their lineages were costing them. Some believe they suspected, but didn't dare speak. Others argue they convinced themselves the body was weak so the crown could be strong. But you, standing beside a child who draws monsters that look like his family, know better. The crown isn't strong, it's just inherited, like everything else in this castle. The winter sun drapes itself over the palace in streaks of wan gold, catching dust motes in the air like drifting thoughts. You're summoned again, this time not to the chambers of a child, but to the grand portrait gallery, where a new likeness is being unveiled. The subject is, unsurprisingly, another young princess. You've lost count of how many Marias you've dressed, how many Charleses you've helped to their chairs. But this time, it's not the girl who's changed. It's the way they want her to be remembered. As you enter, you find the painter already packing up his brushes. A faint odour of linseed oil and ground pigment lingers, and the canvas, still damp in places, glows with impossible vitality. It's Infanta Mariana, a girl you've known since she was 5. She's 13 now, and fading. Her real face lately has grown gaunt. Her teeth don't align, her mouth remains slightly open, and her eyelids often droop with fatigue. The last time you saw her, she'd asked you to read her the same psalm 5 times in a row, claiming she kept forgetting the ending. But the painting? She looks radiant, rosy, full of breath and light. The cheeks are round, the hair thicker, the eyes large and serene. She looks healthy. She looks nothing like the real Mariana. The court officials murmur their approval. The bishop nods solemnly. A fine likeness, he says. You almost laugh. You help lift the painting to its new place on the gallery wall. It will hang beside other girls, Maria's, Elizabeth's, Isabella's, all beautifully preserved, all gracefully doomed. You dust the previous portrait to make room. It's of her aunt, also Mariana. You remember her. She died last spring after her 4th seizure, the last one too long to survive. Her nose and jaw in the portrait have been softened too. You look from one painting to the other. Same pose, same crown tilt, same hopeful gaze into the middle distance, same lie. You remember how the aunt's eyes looked in her final days, ringed with yellow, hollow. And now the younger Mariana is stepping into her frame, literally and figuratively. Later you find the real Mariana in the chapel kneeling. She doesn't notice you until you're close. When she does, she smiles, but weakly. I saw it, she says, the portrait. You don't ask what she thinks of it. Instead, you ask gently, would you like to light a candle? She nods but doesn't move. I get tired, she murmurs. Sometimes just thinking makes me tired. You light it for her. The flame dances briefly, then stills. She leans closer. When I was younger, they said I looked like the Virgin. Now they say I look like Aunt Maria. You hear the fear in her voice, the prophecy of it. And they say Aunt Maria looked like her grandmother, who had fits. You don't deny it. She rests her head against the pew in front of her. Her voice is barely audible now. If I don't look like myself in the painting, does that mean I'll live longer? You wish you could say yes. The painter returns to his workshop. You visit later, delivering cloths to clean his brushes. You can't help but look around. Unfinished sketches, half-done portraits. A sea of aristocratic children, all looking vaguely the same. Smoothed, softened, rewritten. Do they always ask you to change the faces, you ask quietly. He nods without hesitation. They want beauty. You glance at one unfinished sketch. It's clearly young Carlos, but the jaw has been reshaped, the forehead lowered, the eyes brightened. What if they want the truth? He gives a tired smile. They never do. Historical documents often emphasize royal portraiture as propaganda, a visual reassurance of health, youth, power. Scholars agree that paintings of inbred royals often downplayed or outright erased their physical deformities. A Habsburg princess might have been drawn with radiant cheeks even if she never walked unassisted. A king might sit tall in a chair he never stood from. The line had to appear strong, even if it was collapsing behind the scenes. You return to the gallery at sunset. The light slants just so, casting a soft glow across the row of princesses. From a distance they look like saints, angels, icons. But you know better. You know the coughs, the tremors, the half-spoken prayers, the tiny shoes worn only once. And you know what's beneath those oil-painted cheeks. A legacy so tightly wound it bruises from the inside. Still, the portraits hang proudly. Each one a mask, each one a vow. We were beautiful, even if we weren't real. The corridors hum with low whispers as you carry a basket of folded linens toward the southern wing, a place once bustling with nurses and governesses, now quiet as a cloister. It's the part of the castle where time seems to slow, as though even the walls are holding their breath. You're delivering fresh bedclothes to the chamber of Infanta Clara, though you already know they'll likely go unused. Clara has been married for 3 years. She's had no children, not for lack of trying. Everyone knows that. The palace midwives, the priests, the ladies of the court who tally cycles like battle maps. Everyone waits, watches, whispers, but her belly remains still, and the pressure builds. You find her sitting by the window, a book in her lap, untouched. Her hands rest idly on the cover as though it's a prop she's forgotten how to use. Her hair has begun to grey, not dramatically, but enough to hint at stress. She's not old, just stalled. They say I'm barren, she says without looking up. You pause in your step. She turns toward you with a small, humourless smile. They don't say it to my face, of course. They say I'm delicate or anxious or unripened, but they mean barren. You move to change the linens on her bed silently. Clara laughs, soft and bitter. Funny, isn't it? My husband has clubbed feet, an underbite, and the vocabulary of a sheepdog, but no one questions his virility. Just mine. You glance back at her, unsure if she's looking for sympathy, rage, or simply someone to share the echo. She goes on. My mother had 6 miscarriages. My aunt had none, but also no children. My grandmother bled for 3 weeks and then stopped speaking altogether. But me, I'm just barren. You fold the sheets slowly. The silence between her sentences feels jagged. Down the corridor a bell rings faintly. Vespers. Another chance for nobles to kneel and pray for heirs that never arrive. She lowers her voice. Do you know what the bishop told me? You wait. He said perhaps the Lord closed my womb as a test, that if I pray, he might open it. You try to keep your voice even. Do you believe that? She shrugs. I believe my mother prayed every day of her life, and still died alone in a room full of candles. You change the subject. Would you like warm tea? She nods faintly. Yes, with clove. As you leave the room, you pass another chamber, locked, unused. They say it once belonged to a princess who gave birth to twins, conjoined. Neither lived. No one speaks her name anymore, but the midwives do. In code. She had a Clara delivery, they whisper, and everyone understands. Scholars still debate the causes of infertility in noble women during the height of European dynasties. Malnutrition, disease, trauma, all were factors. But increasingly, modern research circles back to one word. Inbreeding. A closed gene pool. Generations of the same chromosomes overlapping like watercolours until the hues muddy and the canvas buckles. You return to Clara with her tea. She's still in the same position. The book hasn't moved. Her eyes drift toward the empty fireplace. She sips. Sometimes I dream I have a daughter, she says, but she looks like me, and like my cousin, and like my aunt, and like a stranger. You don't respond. Would that child be me? She asks softly, or just another copy? You help her into her nightrobe. Her spine curves slightly, and her ankles wobble as she walks. The court physician once blamed her instability on nerves, but you've seen how her fingers cramp when she sews, how her lips twitch when she tries to sing. These are not nerves, these are ghosts. As you tuck her into bed, she asks, what happens if the line ends with me? You smooth the blanket. Then perhaps it needed to. She blinks at the ceiling, then closes her eyes. Later, as you exit the southern wing, you see a priest in the hallway, rosary in hand, muttering prayers outside another chamber. You recognize the nameplate. Another Maria. Another one who never conceived. You return to your quarters, passing a portrait in the stairwell. A woman with long curls and a vacant smile. She had 9 children, and only 2 survived to adulthood. She's remembered as fruitful. Clara may never be remembered at all. But in the quiet ache of her gaze, in the pause before every sentence, in the brittle way she grips her teacup, you know what isn't written in the ledgers, that this family's future was mortgaged long ago, and now the womb is just one more chamber echoing with debts no one can repay. The laundry chamber is quieter than usual when you arrive this morning, and that's rarely a good sign. You step through the arched doorway into the dim stone room where linens steam on copper racks and soap bubbles cling to everything. But today, the wash basins are nearly still. The water is cold. The other maids don't speak. You glance toward the far wall, where the ceremonial gowns are usually hung to dry. Gowns for balls, for baptisms, for betrothals. But today there's a wedding dress, and it's still damp with salt and tears. You approach slowly, taking in the delicate lace, the gold-threaded hems, the tiny pearl buttons. You recognize it immediately. You helped sew it. You'd even stitched the bride's initials into the lining, E.M., Eleonora Maria. You blink. You were told the ceremony had been postponed, that the match was being reconsidered. Apparently that was only partly true, because this dress has been used, but not worn. Lisbeth, the older washerwoman, speaks without looking up. They put it on her anyway. After. You feel something drop inside you. After, you whisper. Lisbeth nods once. She died in her sleep. Night before the vows, you take a step back. Then why? They needed the union to be official, she says. So they married the body. You steady yourself against the wall, the weight of it sinking in. The family married her corpse, dressed her in her bridal gown, finished the ceremony as if she were present and smiling. And the groom? He was her cousin, of course. They shared grandparents and great-grandparents. And now, a ghost of a wedding remains behind in lace and scented soap. You stare at the dress again. Some say Eleonora had been ill. Too many fevers, one physician said. Others whispered of seizures. Still others said she was fine until they began pressing her for airs. The real cause? The blood? The loop? The tangle of generations repeated so often that the pattern frayed at the edge. No one says that out loud, of course. Her mother insisted the dress be washed right away, Lisbeth mutters. Didn't want it to wrinkle. You turn away. You can't look at the gown anymore. Instead, you head upstairs to the embroidery room. There, the younger girls are stitching new linens for another upcoming wedding. A different cousin match. You peer at the initials being sewn, CM and MC. You don't even ask who they are. It doesn't matter. They all share the same blood anyway. One of the girls hums as she works. She's young, new, still thinks needlework is romantic, still thinks royal weddings are celebrations, still believes love can be embroidered like a name. You don't correct her. In the hall outside, you hear the steward announcing another delivery from the tailor, another veil, another set of gloves, another pair of matching slippers. This machine never stops. Later, you pass by the royal crypt entrance. It's sealed now, of course, only opened for official ceremonies, but a single wreath has been placed near the door. White flowers. No note. No one wants to explain why a girl had to be buried in the gown she never walked in. Scholars remain divided on just how common posthumous ceremonies were in European courts. There are records of royal unions declared after death, often to secure inheritance or seal treaties. But behind those cold documents lie real people, real girls with crooked spines and quiet hearts, whose only dowry was their DNA. You return to your quarters in silence. Outside your window, snow begins to fall, light, indifferent, covering the rooftops and statues with the same pale hush. And somewhere in the laundry, that dress still hangs, damp and limp, waiting for someone else to try it on. The bell on the courier's door rings twice, a soft chime, one you've come to associate with secrets rather than announcements. You've been assigned today to assist with the royal correspondence, which usually means sealing parchment and blotting wax, not reading what you're not supposed to see. But the courier is out, and the door was left unlocked, and there, scattered across the desk like feathers from a molting dove, are letters, some unfinished, some sealed, some, most damningly, never sent. You know you shouldn't touch them. You even tell yourself you won't. But your hand moves anyway. The first one is addressed simply, to Her Grace, the Dowager Duchess of Graz. The handwriting is careful, pressed, almost too neat. You read, I do not fear dying, but I do fear staying. I pray each morning that the bells will toll for me instead. The child I bore last year never opened his eyes, but still I see them when I close mine. M. You blink. M could be any of a dozen Marias, but something about the line, still I see them when I close mine, feels so raw, so unedited, it could only have come from someone who thought this letter would remain private forever. You open another, a looser hand, more flourished. Dear brother, I have asked them not to match my daughter with yours. She is tired. Her joints ache. I don't care what the priests say. She has too much of you in her already. This one was never sealed. No wax, no crest, no delivery mark. Just a thought, a plea that stopped mid-air. You shuffle through more, a few from queens to their sisters written during confinement. One begins. The walls are shaped like her face. I see her in the corners. They said it was a girl, but they did not let me hold her. You place that one down quickly. The ink has bled at the edge, possibly from tears. There's one final letter, much older. The parchment is crisp, but brittle. Folded precisely, stored in a separate leather pouch. You hesitate, then open it. To the Emperor, if I must marry again, let it not be a boy with my father's eyes. Let it not be someone who bleeds when he laughs. Let it not be someone who shares my cradle. You freeze. The line about the cradle sticks in your throat. You imagine being born alongside someone, only to be promised to them later. No distinction between sibling, cousin, betrothed, just blood. Scholars often describe royal correspondence as formulaic, ceremonial language used to maintain alliances. But these letters were never filed, never polished. These were confessions, written with the ink of fatigue and frustration. Real voices, women praying into paper. You gently tuck the letters back into their bundles, suddenly aware of how cold your fingertips have become. Outside, the bells begin to toll, not for death, but for supper. Yet you can't shake the feeling that every ring carries a little grief behind it. You glance at the courier's stamp press on the desk. Engraved in bronze, Veritas post coronam, truth after the crown. You wonder if they meant that literally. Back in the servants' hallway, you find two maids talking in hushed tones. One of the princesses hasn't spoken since Epiphany. She writes, though. Letters? Poems? The other girl lowers her voice further. One of them rhymed brother with suffer. You don't react. You've read worse. Later that evening, as you pass the long corridor of portraits, you notice something strange. Several frames are slightly crooked. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to feel off. You pause at one, adjust it. Behind it, just visible through a crack in the plaster, the faint outline of another painting, one that had been covered over, hidden, buried in layers of gold and forgetting. You step back. You realise these women didn't just write letters, they wrote walls, and silence has always been part of the architecture. The door to the midwife's chamber never quite closes, not fully, not even in winter when the stone corridors exhale frost and the rushes on the floor crunch like snow. There's always a crack left open, enough to let the air flow or the rumours escape. You're sent there today with a basin of warm water and a bundle of fresh towels. The message was vague. Another difficult birth, the steward had said, without names, without looking at you. When you arrive, the chamber is dim, candles flickering low in sconces, shadows long and angled. The midwives speak softly. Their sleeves are rolled up, hands still wet, their movements practised and tired. You knock and wait. One of them, a tall woman named Liesel, waves you in without meeting your gaze. You place the basin on the table and begin folding towels into neat, clean squares. You avoid the bed, but you can hear the breathing, shallow, fragile, from both mother and child. Then a cry, sharp, gasping, uncertain, not loud enough to be healthy, not quite silent enough to be mourned just yet. You steal a glance. The infant is swaddled tightly, lips tinged blue, eyes fluttering but unfocused. The mother, a princess from the northern branch, you think, is already asleep or passed out, it's unclear. Her cheeks are bloodless, her wrists limp. One midwife leans over the baby and whispers, "Come on, little dove." The baby twitches, then goes still. Another midwife quietly crosses herself. No one announces anything. They simply begin rapping. You've seen this before. 3 times. No, 4. The stillborns, the underweight, the twisted limbs, the breathless mouths, all of them buried quietly, named only in whispers, or not at all. This time Liesel hands you a small bundle. Take it to the side room. The mother doesn't know yet. You do as you're told. The side room is colder. A table sits by the window, a basin beside it, and the old wooden cradle, the one that hasn't held a living child in years. You set the bundle down carefully, then pause. The baby moves, just once. A tiny, impossible stretch of fingers. You nearly drop the basin. You call softly. Someone comes running. Another midwife. She gasps, whispers a prayer. "Still with us," she murmurs. But only just. She begins to work quickly, warming cloths, stimulating the chest, rubbing the soles of the feet. You assist, barely breathing, terrified to blink. Minutes pass like years. The baby's eyes remain shut. The midwife exhales. "No deformities," she says. "None we can see yet." The word "yet" hangs in the air like a curse, because this is how it starts. Every time. You help prepare the child to be taken to the wet nurse. Carefully, quietly. The birth won't be announced yet. Not until it's certain. Not until the baby can pass for healthy. And even then, perhaps only one painting will ever mention them. One of the older midwives begins to murmur stories as she cleans, tales of others. The infant born with 3 fingers. The girl who didn't blink for the first 5 days. The twins with shared ribs and no names. You ask, "Do you think it's the blood?" She wipes her hands on a cloth and meets your eyes for the first time. I think it's the price. You leave the chamber quietly. As you do, you pass a niche in the wall where little shoes are kept. Dozens of them, woven by palace seamstresses for infants never strong enough to wear them. Some are still bright white, others stained with dust and time. One pair, tiny velvet slippers, is marked MT3, the third Maria Theresa. There are no records of a third. You find yourself walking the long way back to the servants' wing, passing through the corridor of saints. At the far end is a fresco of St. Margaret, cradling a lamb. Her face is faded with age, but someone has redrawn her eyes, large, brown, and round. They look like the infant's. You wonder if that baby will live long enough to speak, or if she too will become another unfinished name. Scholars remain divided on the prevalence of so-called monster births in early modern Europe. Some argue that many tales were exaggerated or symbolic. Others believe the chronic inbreeding of certain dynasties contributed to a spike in congenital anomalies that were carefully hidden, or explained away as divine punishment or miraculous tests. In this palace, they're just called unfortunates, and you wonder, if the line had simply widened just once, could that cry have been louder? Could that baby have laughed? Could she have worn those little velvet shoes? You know the scent of a convent before you see one. Lavender, parchment, and old wood polished with beeswax. You're sent to deliver a box of keepsakes to the cloister of St. Agnes, perched just beyond the castle wall like a quiet afterthought. This is where the daughters who don't marry go, where the women who didn't conceive go, and where a few too many have been sent when their minds started to split at the seams. The box you carry is small but weighty. Inside, an ivory-handled comb, 2 silk ribbons, and a miniature portrait of a girl with a bowed mouth and faraway eyes. The name scrawled on the tag reads, Princess Magdalena. You recognise her. She was in court not a year ago, 16, graceful, too quiet for most people to notice, until she wasn't. The stories swirled quickly, that she screamed during Mass, that she clawed at her cousin during a formal supper, that she laughed in the middle of her own betrothal ceremony. Spirits, they said. Delicate mind, others whispered. But you remember her differently. You remember how she once sang to herself while brushing her hair, a tune with no words, how she watched the birds in the courtyard longer than anyone else, how she winced when someone said she looked like her brother. You arrive at the cloister gates and hand the box to the prioress, a tall, grey-robed woman with the bearing of a dowager queen. She accepts it without comment, just a nod, then disappears behind the wooden door. You pause before leaving, unsure why, until you hear it, faint singing, from inside. A song with no words. You walk the long path back to the castle, mind whirling. You've seen so many daughters vanish behind those gates. Some were labelled too sick to marry. Others were simply forgotten. A few were locked away for excessive melancholy. One girl, Infanta Teresa, went in after her third failed engagement. She had one brown eye and one blue, and a habit of asking guests if they believed in reincarnation. No one's seen her in 5 years. Inside the castle, few speak of these women. Their portraits aren't hung. Their names don't make the marriage rolls. Instead, they become the others. The shadows behind the stained glass, the names mumbled in prayers, the letters never delivered. Scholars remain divided on how often noblewomen were committed to convents not by choice, but as a polite exile, a way to clean up the family tree without removing branches too violently, a peaceful pruning. You return to the servants' hall and find a new directive posted. Another young lady is being considered for the cloister option. This time it's one of the king's nieces, 17, no known suitors, prone to nosebleeds and long silences. You wonder what her reason will be. Weak lungs, too many dreams. Later, as you dust the reliquary room, you notice a shelf filled with velvet-bound prayer books. You open one. Inside, pressed between 2 psalms, is a page with tiny, perfect handwriting. They said I had too much of my uncle's jaw, too much of my cousin's voice, too many thoughts for a girl, so I chose God, because he didn't ask who my father was. No name, no date. But you fold it gently and place it back. That night you pass the chapel during evening mass. The queen is there, seated beside her daughters. 2 of them are singing softly. One stares at the floor. You wonder how many of them already know they won't be wives. You wonder how many already hear the songs without words. You walk on. And somewhere behind you, beyond the castle wall, the cloister door creaks open again. The morning fog clings low to the palace grounds as you walk a familiar path with unfamiliar weight in your chest. Today you're attending a royal funeral, not as a mourner, but as a handmaid assigned to assist with final preparations. The name on the order is short, delicate, and chilling in its finality. Princess Elsbeth. No title beyond that. No husband's name. No mention of heirs. Just Elsbeth. You remember her. Everyone does, in that quiet, uncertain way reserved for women who were always present but never central. She spoke rarely above a whisper. She blinked slowly, as though thinking took effort, and when she walked, it was like the floor wasn't always where she expected it to be. She died 2 nights ago, in her sleep. No struggle, no drama, just absence. You enter her chamber to help prepare the body. It's already been dressed in a pale blue gown, the same shade as the veil she wore during her ill-fated engagement last spring. The colour had suited her, though she never smiled in it. Her face now is still. There's a peacefulness to it, but also something else, a kind of resignation, like a candle that was never really allowed to burn. You gently smooth her hair, adjust the neckline, and lay a posy of pressed violets in her folded hands. Not because it was requested, but because it feels needed. No one should leave without flowers. There's no crown, no formal regalia. Her lineage is known, of course. Daughter of a duke, granddaughter of a king, cousin to 3 different queens. But her name will not appear in songs or ballads. She had no offspring, no official position. She was simply one of them, another link in the hereditary chain that eventually rusted through. Outside, the small procession begins to gather. No trumpets, just slow, measured footfalls and black gloves over blue fingers. You follow at the rear as they carry her through the chapel corridor. A few courtiers bow their heads. Most look away. And you remember something she said once, so soft you almost thought you imagined it. I don't think I belong in portraits. She never was painted, as far as you know. At the altar, a priest recites the same words he said for a dozen other girls in the last 3 years. A gentle spirit, returned to rest. The candles flicker as he speaks. No wind. Just exhaustion. You glance around. Few in attendance seem moved. Most seem relieved. Afterward, you help carry the folded shroud to the side sacristy. You notice her slippers, still unused. She always preferred bare feet. The queen is absent. The king did not come. Only one of Elsbeth's sisters kneels briefly before the coffin, silent, head bowed. You notice her fingers clenching the hem of her dress. Her knuckles are white. She doesn't speak. Then she too is led away. The burial happens quickly, quietly. No songs, just soil and silence. Scholars remain divided on how often women like Elsbeth were lost to the margins of royal history. Some believe their passivity was part of the design, bred into them, expected of them. Others suggest that these women were victims of a dynasty that prioritized names over health, alliances over affection, and repetition over renewal. You return to the empty chamber to collect the rest of her belongings. A book of psalms never finished, a broken hair comb, a pair of gloves too small for most hands, and a diary. You shouldn't, but you open it anyway. Only one page has writing. Sometimes I feel like a pause between people, like the silence in a song, not a note, not the end, just the part no one remembers. You close the book. Outside, snow has begun to fall. It lands gently on the stone parapets. It doesn't settle. It melts on contact, just like Elsbeth. She never made a ripple, but she was water, all the same. The afternoon sun casts long, narrow rectangles of light across the velvet-draped walls as you pass through the west drawing room, a place normally reserved for whispered gossip and quiet embroidery. Today, however, it hosts an audience of the most dangerous kind. Royal advisors, noble scholars, and a single scholar priest whose voice drops to a murmur each time someone walks by. You're not meant to be in this room. But you've been assigned to serve tea, which in this castle often means serving silence and listening. You move quietly, careful not to clatter a single saucer, as you approach the circle of men standing just inside the crimson-draped alcove. Their robes brush the polished floor. Their fingers twist rings and rosaries in slow, nervous turns. One of them, a gaunt man with spectacles, leans forward. I'm telling you, he says under his breath, this line is doomed. The others don't speak, but no one contradicts him. Your hand tightens on the tray. The conversation resumes in fragmented Latin and Low French, but you've been around long enough to decode the meaning beneath the formality. They're talking about Carlos, of course, and not just him, the daughters who cannot bear, the sons who cannot speak, the girls sent to convents, the infants who don't live to be named. They're talking about a dynasty in decline. The scholar priest, whose hair is thin and hands tremble slightly, opens a leather folio and slides out a sheaf of diagrams. You catch a glimpse as you refill his cup. A family tree, twisting, knotting, curling back on itself like a serpent devouring its own tail. They have traced it, he says, from Maximilian to Leopold to Charles to Carlos, from Isabella to Mariana to Juana. The same blood. Too little difference, too much repetition. One man whispers, "We have to widen the pool." Another replies, "Too late, we've sunk the boat." There's a silence then, a heavy, aching one. You try to step away unnoticed, but someone addresses you. "You there?" says the priest, not unkindly. "Have you served in the nursery wing?" You nod. "And what have you seen?" You freeze. "What have you seen?" You've seen twisted limbs and cradles too fine for them. You've seen girls who faint when they walk more than 10 steps. You've seen babies who never blink, and others who blink too much. You've seen toddlers with the faces of ancestors they've never met. And you've seen eyes that shine like polished coins, but don't reflect anything back. "I've seen fragility, Father," you say, careful. He nods slowly. "That's the word they'll use," he murmurs. "In the records. Fragility. Not decay, not fault, not inbreeding." You bow and retreat, your hands shaking ever so slightly on the tray. Later that evening, you find yourself back in the hallway behind the council chamber. There's a little vent near the fireplace there, one that carries sound more clearly than it should. You don't mean to eavesdrop, but the voices carry. "There must be an air," says one voice. "We cannot let the line end with a whimper." "And yet, what do we call what's happening now?" another answers. "This is the whimper," someone sighs. The scholar priest again. "We have mistaken preservation for survival." You back away slowly. On your way to the library wing, you glance at the busts lining the corridor, granite and marble likenesses of kings and queens long dead. Their faces are serene, symmetrical, carved with precision. But you know those are lies too. The sculptors were told to flatter. The flaws were polished away. The Habsburg jaw chiselled smooth, the squints corrected, the too close eyes adjusted to a more divinely ordained spacing. Even in stone, the truth was too fragile to bear. Scholars today continue to debate when exactly the Habsburgs realised the genetic loop they were trapped in. Some believe they noticed as early as the 1500s. Others suggest they never truly admitted it, only danced around it, covering cracks with incense and silver thread. But you? You just poured tea into the room where a man said, "This line is doomed," and no one argued. No one laughed. No one dared call it treason, because in this castle, even the truth wears a velvet hood. You descend the back stairwell slowly, carrying a bundle of folded sketches wrapped in linen. They're bound for the Royal Archive, the quietest and least visited part of the castle, where the artist's preliminary drafts are stored. Portraits that never made it to canvas, concept studies, anatomical outlines, and other pieces. The ones they don't display, the ones that tell the truth. The archive keeper is an old man named Corbin. He greets you with a nod, ink-stained fingers twitching slightly as he lifts the linen wrap from your arms. He doesn't ask questions. He just slides the sketches into a drawer labelled Linea Privatae, private lines. But your curiosity gets the better of you. He sees it in your eyes. "Go on," he mutters, stepping aside. "I pick a folio." "Carefully." You do, and what unfolds beneath your hands is both familiar and utterly foreign. Portraits of the same royal women you've dressed, served and helped to bed, before the corrections. Unflattering angles, real features, the crooked teeth, the swollen lips, the sloped shoulders, the uneven eyes. You recognise Infanta Clara, not as she's remembered, but as she really was. Jaw too long, right eye smaller than the left, nose oddly hooked like her cousin's. There's Carlos too, a study from the neck up. His tongue protrudes slightly, his gaze doesn't focus. You flip through faster now, heart pounding. Some sketches are crossed out. Others bear notes in tight apologetic script. Adjust chin to appear less severe. Hide fingers, too malformed. Add bloom to cheeks, original complexion grey. Do not copy this, for study only. One page stops you cold. A child, unlabelled, lying on a pillow, eyes closed, hands curled in on themselves, skin tight over bone. Next to it, scrawled in haste, buried without name, stillborn of Charles and Maria, third such case. You press the paper back down as gently as if it could scream. Corbin speaks behind you. The artists knew, more than the physicians even. You nod, barely breathing. Their job, he continues, was not just to glorify. It was to record, but quietly. He gestures toward a high shelf. Some portraits are composites, he says. They take the brow from one cousin, the mouth from another, and the eyes from the one that didn't survive. That way, it still looked like the family, but better, healthier. You glance at a canvas propped against the wall. It's unfinished. The sitter's face is only half rendered. One side youthful and soft, the other more real, gaunt, discoloured, dull-eyed. Two truths side by side. He chuckles grimly. Some of them would rather be remembered wrongly than not at all. You help him stack the newer sketches onto a shelf marked Archivum non publicandum, not for public display. As you do, you notice a smaller bundle tucked beneath it. Not portraits this time. Letters, dozens, maybe hundreds. Some of the women wrote to the artist, Corbin explains, privately, to beg. Please make me taller. Please leave out the mole. Please don't draw my hands. One asked to be painted with closed lips because her teeth frightened her. You ask, did they comply? He gives a long, sad nod. They always comply, because if they don't, the painting ends up here, and the sitter becomes a rumour instead of a memory. You return the folder gently and step back, feeling the chill of the archive creep into your ribs. As you leave, you glance back at one final portrait tucked into a corner where the candlelight barely reaches. It's unlabelled. But you know the face. It's Juana La Loca. No crown, no coffin. Just her face, unedited. Eyes wide, mouth parted, one lock of hair falling over her shoulder like a question that will never be answered. You close the door softly behind you. Scholars still debate how much the royal artists were complicit in masking the effects of generations of inbreeding, whether they were deceivers or protectors. Some suggest they were pressured. Others believe they took pride in creating beauty from decline. But in the silence of that archive, you know the truth. They saw. They drew the collapse. They painted the hush. And then they set it behind a velvet curtain and pretended it never happened. The wind has changed. It whistles now through the tallest towers of the palace, rattling shutters and tugging at the fading banners like an impatient hand. You climb the stairs toward the high east wing with slow, steady steps. Today, you've been summoned to sit beside the last of her line. She lies in a room untouched by time, stone walls covered in faded brocade, a low-burning fire perfuming the air with cedar and ash, and a great canopy bed carved with family crests, whose meanings no one alive remembers anymore. Her name is Maria Josefa, though most have stopped saying it aloud. She has no children, no titles left, no husband still breathing, only attendants, physicians, and the echo of her own name repeated in portraits. You draw the curtains back gently. She's awake, barely. Thin as parchment, skin nearly translucent, hair like frost clinging to her scalp. Her breath is soft, shallow, and uneven, but her eyes, even now, are wide open, watching, waiting. You sit at her bedside. She does not flinch. I remember your face, she says faintly. You smile. I've been here before. She nods, then coughs. A dry, frail sound that seems to shake the pillows more than her body. I used to be painted, she says. 3 times. Each time, less of me. You reach for her hand. It's cold, lighter than you remember. You were beautiful, you whisper. She smiles faintly. I was corrected. Silence. A single log in the hearth snaps. The sound makes her blink slowly. They told me I had the finest blood in Europe, she murmurs, but I could never climb a stair without help. Outside, bells ring in the lower courtyard, metal striking air with dull purpose. You served my mother, she says suddenly. You nod. She thought she was having a boy, said no girl could bear this name again. She turns slightly toward the window, though she cannot rise to see through it. Does the orchard still bloom? She asks. You hesitate. The orchard was cut down last year, roots too tangled to yield fruit. Yes, you lie gently. It's full of blossoms. She closes her eyes. They said I was to marry a cousin, she whispers. You did, you remind her, a faint laugh. Which one? You do not answer. She opens her eyes again, fixed on a spot above the bed where a wooden beam bears the engraving. Virtus in sanguine. Strength in blood. You both know that hasn't been true for generations. Scholars still debate the moment the line truly broke, when the Habsburgs passed from legend to echo. Some point to Carlos, others to Juana, others still to the unnamed infants buried before baptism. But sitting here beside Maria Josefa, it becomes clear. It wasn't one death. It was dozens of quiet ones. Losses folded into brocade, hidden in convents, painted over with blush and powdered wigs. I dream, she says, that I'm someone else, with wide hips, with heat in my cheeks, with sons. You squeeze her hand. I wake up, she continues, and I still have my uncle's jaw. Outside, the wind howls against the shutters. Inside, her breath grows fainter. You sit with her as night falls, the fire guttering lower and lower, until only coals remain. She speaks once more, barely audible. If they ask, say I died proud. You nod, even now. But in truth, her pride was a costume she wore until the seam split. You stay until the physician arrives. He says nothing, just looks once at her still frame, then covers her face with the sheet. Another name carved into marble, another echo fading in the corridor, another crown returned to a box that will never open again. And for the first time, the silence feels complete. So here you are, drifting at the edge of a dynasty that folded in on itself like a closed book. The pages too smudged to read anymore. The candles have burned low, the whispers have faded into the rafters, and the last of those noble daughters lies still beneath silken sheets, her bloodline, once so prized, finally resting. You've walked through quiet halls, heard coughs in nurseries, tied the slippers of children born tired. You've lifted linens that carried dreams and disappointments alike. You've heard women ask questions no one dared answer. Will he love me? Do I look like my brother? Will my child survive? You've seen how legacy can become a weight too heavy for the body that carries it, and now, as the embers dim and the wind nudges gently against the window pane, you begin to feel your own breath slowing. Not with fear, but with something softer. Acceptance, perhaps. Understanding. Because sometimes the most haunting history is the one no one meant to tell, the one hidden in brushstrokes and broken lullabies, the one painted over, corrected, tucked into drawers labelled private. You were there, you heard it all, and now you can let it go. So sink a little deeper under your blanket, close your eyes, if they haven't already. The castle is still, the portraits are silent, and the final page has turned. End of script. Sweet dreams.